1960. The Japanese economy is growing at an unbelievable rate. Many factories use mercury in various chemical processes. This is the island of Kyushu, southern Japan. On the shores of the Shiranui Sea, the Chiso chemical plant is about to bring tragedy to an entire region. Why did tragedy strike here rather than elsewhere? Because for decades, the Chiso plant has been dumping inorganic mercury into an inland sea with no more outlets than a lake. The Chiso plant uses mercury as a catalyst in the production of acetic acid. In all, 918 fishermen and others who gain their living from the sea have been stricken by what is now known as Minamata disease. By 1975, the disease had caused 140 deaths. This film documents the 20 years of suffering of an entire population. It is both a tribute to their courage and a solemn warning to the rest of the world. When Minamata disease claimed its first victims, there were no less than 2,010 ppm of mercury in the area the Chiso plant used as a dump. 1 ppm, or 1 part per million, equals 1 milligram per liter. These are the results of a study conducted in 1973 by the Kumamoto Prefecture. Is it surprising that the disease continues to claim new victims when such large quantities of mercury are still to be found in the bay? Neither the plant nor the government has been able to take effective steps to counteract the effects of such massive pollution. Fishing has in fact been forbidden, but only in a small part of the Shiranui Sea, which contains over 25 ppm. The Shiranui Sea has become a sea of death. The fish in the bay have a sufficiently high mercury content to give anyone who eats large quantities Minamata disease. The government therefore pays fishermen to destroy the fish. Given the mobility of fish, however, this solution is no solution at all. The bay contains a great variety of fish, but no matter how experienced the fisherman, there is no way in which he can recognize a contaminated fish. Even a contaminated fish looks fresh and edible. Yet the people who have eaten the fish have died, one after another. Tokyo, political, financial, and cultural nerve center of Japan, devoted almost exclusively to economic growth, long considered Minamata disease to be one more result of pollution, deplorable, of course, but restricted to one area. In fact, no one really knew much about the disease until one day in March 1973, when the exasperated victims of the disease traveled the 1,400 kilometers to the capital at their own expense to make themselves heard, to make their plight known. The victims had been fighting Chiso in court for 4 years trying to get compensation. In March 1973, the court finally acknowledged their claim and found Chiso guilty. For 18 years, Chiso had been fiercely denying responsibility and had refused to give any kind of compensation. With the court's decision, the struggle began all over again. Chiso had always acted through a third party in dealing with the problem in Minamata. When it recognized the company's responsibility, the court forced the president, Mr. Shimada, and his associates to meet the victims face to face. All was ready. In a written declaration prepared in advance by the victims, Chiso was to ask pardon and agree to subsidize the needs of everyone who had suffered from mercury poisoning. The president had only to sign solemn promise. Chiso accepts the court order and holds itself responsible for Minamata disease. Chiso therefore agrees to use every possible means to compensate the victims honestly and fairly. I, the President, solemnly so promise and sign.
ここに書いてございますご趣旨はもう誠にごもっともでございます。私どもは判決に従うわけでございますので、その責任を認めるわけでございますが、その次のことでございまして、水俣病に関わるすべての償いを誠意をもって実行いたしますという。
Chiso offered to pay the court costs in an effort to evade its responsibilities.
いたしたいと思います。思いますがですね。
But the victims continued to demand that Chiso subsidize all their needs. A company's resources are not infinite. Please add, within the limits of our capacity. Chiso could go bankrupt if it had to compensate too many victims. And we have to think of future victims. So please add what I have requested. Rewrite the text, adding, insofar as possible.
この後の問題についてできる限りはいたしますから、そのできる限りということを入れさせていただきたいと、それをお願い申し上げているんです。
剥がしてください。
Now, a child unable to speak indicates that the president must sign. And anger begins to raise its head. Give us back our health. And not only our health, give us back the sea. Give me my health and you can keep your money. We'll call it quits. And we'll go back to Minamata. We've had enough trouble. 22 years earlier, in 1951, Minamata disease first appeared in the fishing village some distance from the plant. At the time, the city of Minamata thought it was a contagious disease raging among the poor, and all contact with the village was avoided. In 1956, there were 56 victims. 35% of them died that same year. Dr. Ito was one of the first to examine the victims in Minamata. As early as 1956, he was recording cases on 8mm film. At first, I thought it might be a contagious disease like polio. Later, I suspected that some insecticide or other was contaminating the drinking water, but that wasn't it either. There remained the possibility of a contagious disease caused by a virus. This child suddenly lost her sight, the ability to speak, and the ability to walk. This child's legs had stiffened. To the great distress of his mother, he frequently suffered convulsions. 4 years later, he died. There was no lack of cases. This little girl's legs were affected. She could not keep her balance. Children and old people were the most severely affected. Many of the sick were admitted to the Chiso Plant Hospital. They were put among patients with communicable diseases. One after the other, they died. This patient goes into convulsions whenever he drinks water. Most of the victims were fishermen, and all showed the same symptoms: constriction of the visual field, impaired hearing, speech difficulties, loss of the sense of touch, lack of coordination, and convulsions. The doctors began to suspect that the mysterious disease was carried by fish. Minamata Bay is a generous provider of fish of all kinds, and it takes much more than a storm to keep the fishermen from going to sea. It was not uncommon for a fisherman to eat over 500 grams of fish per day.
原因物質がなかなかつかめないもんだから、もうそれがもう非常に悩みでしたね。
By that time, Dr. Ito had begun to suspect the wastes from the chiso plant. Viscous mud with a purple coloration could be observed where the sewers deposited the waste. We now know that the mud could contain hundreds, even thousands of ppm of mercury. There are always lots of cats in a fishing village, but our cats were all dying in the strangest way. They went completely crazy and ran around senselessly. Sometimes they jumped up at our faces and scratched us. We had to protect ourselves with a blanket. 5 of my cats were affected. Some threw themselves into the sea. Meanwhile, 2 of my daughters began to act like the cats. They became agitated for no reason and let out great screams. The older of the 2 died shortly after. I thought my cats had infected my daughters. All the members of the Tanaka family have Minamata disease in varying degrees.
これが自然発生猫ですけどね。これはですね、やはり28年ですか、最初の患者さん我々が辿っていたその頃からね、猫が。
I had heard of the cat's behavior. After doing a little research, I learned that the cats had been dying in this strange way for some years. They jumped into the sea and drowned. The village people were terrified by the cat's suicide.
ゆだれ垂れとるでしょ、ゆだれを。これはさっきの水俣湾ですがね、そこに。
At that point, I decided to feed a cat on shellfish from the bay as an experiment, shellfish with a high mercury content.
猫に食わせるわけなんですよ。猫がこれ食うと、これ本当に食うわけです。
By the end of the week, the disease appeared for the first time under laboratory conditions. That was in April 1957. The cat had difficulty walking and could not keep its balance. Its tail was stiff, and there was no coordination in the hind legs. Experiments with cats increased. Each new autopsy brought the scientists a little closer to the answer. It nevertheless took 2 or 3 years before they could establish a direct and definite link between Minamata disease and mercury. In 1956, Kumamoto University filmed some of the more serious cases. This patient has convulsions. An attack occurs whenever she is excited, when a stranger comes near, for instance. She cannot smoke because of sporadic trembling, or more specifically, effort tremor. Symptoms such as these have been observed in the region for almost 20 years. As soon as the brain is affected, loss of peripheral vision, loss of hearing, loss of the sense of touch, and lack of coordination follow. At that point, there is very little human dignity left. This man was an excellent fisherman. His son was a victim of the disease, but he thought he himself had escaped. And then one night, he lost all control over his body. Look at him now. His fingers no longer feel anything. He would like to light a cigarette, but his hand will not obey. Lack of coordination is total. He is not even able to take a drink of water without help. Here he is just before his death, surrounded by his children. They are all sick, but the father will die first. It is not the willpower, not the muscular strength to act which he lacks, but the ability to control his movements. There is no medication which can help him. All anyone can do is prevent him from hurting himself by falling against the wall. Death released him from his agony 50 days after he fell ill. It is unlikely that such dramatic cases of the disease will again occur in Minamata. Cases of fishermen who ate large quantities of fish when mercury contamination was at its height. Today, the symptoms of Minamata disease take different forms, sometimes surprising, always terrifying. Until recently, no one dared show the medical films to the public. But once we have seen, once we know, we can better understand. Why did you not acknowledge your responsibility earlier? Our sea would have remained clean. There would be fewer victims. How many more will there be? And the babies born with the disease? When will you cease to scorn the afflicted? If there were at least a cure. I don't want your signature. I don't want your signature or your money. Money means nothing to me. It's my father I want. Give me back my children. Give me back my health. What are you doing for this poor little girl who tried to speak to you earlier? Surely you too have a family. Why were we born? There's nothing to live for. You can't really be human if you can tolerate this. Once attacked by mercury, can the brain ever recover its normal function? Impossible. Once destroyed, the nerve cells of the brain cannot regenerate. In this, they differ from other cells. The cells of the liver and the kidneys can regenerate, but never those of the brain. Look at the spongy condition of the brain of young Yanemori, who died at the age of 7. Nothing could be done. Once they had traced the origin of Minamata disease to mercury, specialists realized with despair that they were completely helpless. Chiso, however, continued to deny that its waste mercury was responsible, stating that the disease was caused by the submarine bombs used in the last World War. In Tokyo, armchair scientists defended Chiso's theories. Only the scientists at Kumamoto University persisted in identifying as the sole cause of the disease the mercury poured out by Chiso. Meanwhile, the fishermen began to lose patience. Several times they blocked that part of the port which belongs to the company. The people of Minamata obtained both their income and their food from the sea. They had to take action against those who were contaminating the sea. Chiso systematically ignored all the requests made by the fishermen, and with a clear conscience had the police guard their property. Yet, through the experiments it had itself been secretly conducting with cats since 1959, the board of directors knew that the plant wastes were at the root of the disease. In 1959, Chiso charitably offered them a little money in return for their signature on an infamous contract which in effect said that those who accepted these ludicrous sums would lose all right to recourse should the company one day be held responsible. At the same time, Chiso announced the construction of a new purifying device. All harmful substances were to be eliminated, a simple social precaution. The installation later proved to be completely inadequate.
水俣病を出した犯人なんだということを知ってたっていうかですね。で、それを
I am in a position to know that Chiso used mercury and dumped some into the sea. I was responsible for analyzing the rate of mercury concentration. At the time, I did not have the courage to speak. To speak meant to lose my job. My conscience bothered me some, of course, but I kept silent until a few years ago. This man is now fighting alongside the victims of the disease. In the plant, the union is divided into two parties. One denounces the pollution. The other defends the company. Over the next 10 years, Chiso increased its production, although mercury was acknowledged as the cause of the disease. For 20 years then, Chiso had been dumping deadly wastes into the sea, polluting an entire region with impunity. Who would dare call that an accident? Certainly not the victims. And if that was not criminal behavior, what is?
このフィルムを撮った時代っていうのは、ちょうどですね。
This man has specialized in the study of congenital Minamata disease. When this film was made in 1962, the climax had passed. We already knew that the inorganic mercury waste from the plant was at the root of the evil.
で、あと残った問題として、当時から気がつかれてたけれども。
Yet there remained a perplexing problem. Wherever Minamata disease had attacked in strength, children were to be found suffering from an unidentified disorder. Could these children have been attacked by organic mercury in their mother's womb? This was an important medical question. I assembled all the children in the hospital and was instantly struck by the similarities in their symptoms. This observation made it possible to establish the existence of congenital Minamata disease.
胎児性水俣病であるというこの実証していく上で非常に重要なことだったわけです。坂本忍君ですけれども。
This child's sister died of Minamata disease at an early age. She herself is unable to tie a knot. This child of 6 is an even more severe case.
月の浦で生まれたんですけれども、言葉はほとんどない。この当時6つですけれども。
She is incapable of expressing herself and barely reacts to light. Her limbs are deformed, and she weighs only 14 kilos. Her neck can no longer support her head, and a contorted smile seems to be frozen on her face.
笑いは脅迫笑いというわけです。それから花が和光君で、これは漁師の子で、お父さんも水俣病です。
Here is another child whose father died of Minamata disease. He has strabismus. He is mentally retarded.
手の障害も強いですけども、足の障害が強い。
His legs are deformed, and even with help, he is unable to move them.
なんとか動かそうという意志は働くんですけれども、足がうまくいかない。ああいう変形が強い。引きずってしまう。これはモドの漁師の娘で。
This girl, daughter of a fisherman, has primitive reflexes. Opening the mouth or grasping an object is not a sign of definite intention. These are the reflexes of a newborn baby. In fact, all cerebral development ceased just after birth.
脳の発達の段階が新生児の段階で止まっていると。
This child has been less seriously affected. He can put on his shoes, although with difficulty.
で、靴を履いたりするこんな簡単な動作だって非常に時間がかかる。
He cannot hope for a normal life. He can move, of course, but does that make him a normal, fully developed person? The mothers of these children with congenital brain damage had few, if any, symptoms of Minamata disease.
大人には大したその症状を残さなくても
So organic mercury had already attacked a second generation. This phenomena is still not fully understood by the medical world. 15 years after the congenital results of the disease were observed, Dr. Harada described the dangers of organic mercury. An old medical theory defines the placenta as a barrier protecting the fetus from all possibility of poisoning. I, for one, believe that the mothers who gave birth to seriously afflicted children would themselves have had more obvious symptoms. They often said, "We eat lots of fish. That's why our children are sick." If we don't have many symptoms, it's because our children absorbed all the mercury in us. For a physician, such a statement was unscientific, or at least had to be proven. And yet, after conducting experiments on animals, we faced the facts. Organic mercury concentrates in the fetus rather than in the mother's body. Maternal instinct had been right. Using radioautography, we will now follow with Dr. Shiraki the progress of inorganic mercury injected into a pregnant mouse. The inorganic mercury can be detected within the placenta and in the walls of the uterus, but as you can see, none of the 4 fetuses has been affected. If organic mercury is used, however, similar traces are found not only in the placenta and the walls of the uterus, but also in the fetus. It is in this respect that organic and inorganic mercury differ completely. Organic mercury can be found in the heart and the liver of the fetus. Look at the nerves of the brain, the medulla oblongata, the spinal cord. The liver and the heart are definitely less seriously attacked than the brain of the fetus. This child is probably a victim of Minamata disease, but she doesn't receive any compensation. The commission responsible for designating the official victims of Minamata disease decided she was suffering from cerebral palsy. For 3 years, they have been refusing her on the pretext that it is very difficult to distinguish clinically between ordinary cerebral palsy and cerebral palsy caused by mercury poisoning. Dr. Harada endeavored to discover the quantity of fish eaten by the women during their pregnancy. From an epidemiological standpoint, it could be said that this child is a victim of Minamata disease, but without more positive medical proof, she cannot qualify for compensation. There are many such cases at present, and each time a woman becomes pregnant, she suffers the greatest anxiety. Mr. President, for us, the parents, it's not so bad. It's the children who are important. There's no more hope for them. Without them, our lives have no meaning. And you are killing them, our children, instead of helping them. And you claim to be human. Answer. If you still have any feeling, say that you will do something to save our children. Near the waste dumps of the Chiso plant, a concentration of 300 ppm of mercury can still be found. The process by which inorganic mercury is transformed into organic mercury in nature was already known. We will now explain the phenomenon of methyl mercury concentration. Take a river, for example. Everything begins with the plankton and algae, which are eaten by small aquatic organisms. Some of these organisms eat others and are in turn eaten by fish. The big fish eat the smaller fish, and so on. This is called the food chain. The methyl mercury contained in the water invades the fish through its skin and gills. A high concentration is rapidly reached. It has been discovered that each link in the chain contains 3,000 times the mercury found in the preceding link. At each stage, then, the concentration is multiplied by 3,000. That means a lot of multiplication by 3,000. The mercury is first absorbed into the intestines of the fish. At the first stage, the concentration is 3,000. At the second stage, more mercury is absorbed. And there is the third stage, and the fourth, and the fifth. In the sea, there are even more stages, for there are many more sizes of fish. Thus, through the food chain, a negligible quantity of mercury rapidly reaches a high concentration. In order to understand the process by which mercury is absorbed by an organism, Dr. Shiraki injected radioactive organic mercury into a monkey. This is the radioautogram taken 1 hour after injection. The mercury has concentrated in the liver, in the tongue muscles, in the bone marrow of the spine. It is because the mercury is instantly fixed by the red corpuscles that so much is found wherever there is blood. Look at the head. The methyl mercury has penetrated the monkey's tongue, easily absorbed by the muscles. The brain is already partially affected. The black stains show that the blood vessels are the first to be attacked. In this case, the radioautogram was taken 8 days after the injection of radioactive organic mercury. The distribution of mercury is not the same. Surprisingly, the brain and the spinal cord have a much higher concentration than in the first specimen. The mercury level in the liver and kidneys remains high, but it is obviously lower in the bone marrow and the aorta. Thus, fixed by the red blood cells, the mercury is diffused to the nerve cells. With time, certain regions of the brain become more seriously affected than others. There is a very high accumulation in the occipital lobe, seat of the visual faculties. This is the monkey's eye. Light impressions enter here, pass through the retina and along the optic nerve to the visiopsychic cerebral cortex, where the nerve impulse is transformed into a visual sensation. As you know, constriction of the visual field is one of the symptoms of Minamata disease. This is the part of the brain which is most seriously attacked by organic mercury. Here is the damaged brain of an 8-year-old child from Minamata. This is the artery which supplies the brain. It has undergone a change. The wall has thickened and degenerated. Because the canal has shrunk, the flow of blood has diminished and has affected the functioning of the entire brain. This is the brain of a patient who died at the age of 28. Many of the nerve cells have been destroyed. The problem is this artery.
動脈なんですね。でこれを大きくしてみましょう。そうしますとやはりですね。
As in the first case, obstruction prevents the blood from circulating normally. There is little room left for blood circulation. In fact, it's a case of arteriosclerosis. Now, here is a monkey, 20 hours after the injection of organic mercury.
ここは心臓ですね。これもうちょっと大きくしてみましょう。これが心臓なんですけども。
As you can see, the heart muscle has been seriously affected. This is the aorta. The muscles of the walls are saturated with mercury. As early as 1940, the English Hunter Russell report on the death of employees working in a factory manufacturing methyl mercury noted the case of a man who supposedly died of heart disease. This report was a great help to us, but with a heart like this one, we were able to go much further. Mercury provoked arteriosclerosis in the coronary artery, which supplies the cardiac muscle.
血液の流れが悪くなる。そうすると心臓。
Mercury was the true cause of death. Chiso stopped using mercury in 1968, 15 years after Minamata disease had been identified. Yet the disease still appears today, with symptoms affecting the entire body. Neither Chiso nor the government had foreseen such a multitude of disastrous effects. Noboru Tsuchimoto lived normally for 15 years in the region where the disease was rampant. Suddenly, in 1974, he fell ill. The concentration of mercury is not high in his blood or in his hair, yet he has all the symptoms of Minamata disease. This was a great shock for the physicians. According to the traditional theory of poisoning, symptoms cannot lie latent for 15 years. Today, there are 3,000 cases waiting to be officially recognized as victims of Minamata disease. One woman recently died before being designated as a victim of the disease. You killed Matsumoto's wife, and he begs for your pity. A victim claims help from the assassin. Does it make any sense? Have you no sense of honor? You should be ashamed of yourself to set up such a system of compensation. Chiso really cannot pay for every disease medicine uncovers for you. There are more and more of them. We must have specific criteria.
俺がね、昭和44年のね、10月からね、各患者の家庭を回った。その時に30何名ね。
That's enough. Since 1970, I have been working with undesignated cases. I know of more than 30 with problems. Half of them have not even applied for designation. They are afraid of being suspected of doing it for the money. I have known you for 20 years, and I know what you are like. Why have such a confrontation? Because there have never been any direct negotiations between Chiso and its victims. Moreover, the victims already have a long history of struggle. At first, they don't know what is killing them. Then Chiso is identified as the source of contamination, but it persistently denies responsibility. There are legal suits and demonstrations, but the town belongs to Chiso, and any action might lead to reprisals. In 1970, The victims buy shares in the company so that they can meet the president at the annual shareholders meeting. There, they win the support of all those who are fighting pollution. In 1971 and 1972, the victims stage a year-long sit-in in front of Chiso's head office in Tokyo. They are attacked and sued, as are their supporters. This episode brings the people of Minamata to the forefront of the fight against pollution. In the last analysis, they ask, is the system more important than man? Are you going to pay for 2 deaths? Yes or no? The time for excuses is past. The children born with congenital Minamata disease are 17 to 19 years old now. Since no treatment is possible, they are kept in a special center, waiting for death. The physicians say these are the strongest. Many others died at birth or before. The filming of the daily life of these children is usually forbidden. Consequently, not many people are aware of their existence. To come here is to discover the hell of mercury pollution. The very existence of these children is an eloquent plea against the abuses of modern civilization. Mr. President, you are a Zen Buddhist. What does Zen Buddhism teach? Is your wife a Buddhist too? She's a Catholic. What does Catholicism teach then? What's the difference between a Catholic and a Zen Buddhist? What do you think of Zen and Catholic teachings? You have children. The sick also have children. Is there so much difference between your family and mine? Everyone has the right to happiness. Isn't that what we were born for? And the men continue to fish in the contaminated sea. Unable to guarantee any other source of income for the 100,000 inhabitants of the region, the government has not completely forbidden fishing. In any case, for the people of the sea, fish, whether contaminated or not, will always remain a gift of God. To ask them why they continue to eat fish would be as pointless as to ask them why they are Japanese. The terrible lesson of Minamata has not prevented the death of other innocents from new sources of mercury pollution in Japan. In many other countries where mercury is used, the same process is taking place. Indifference and cowardice are widespread, which seems to suggest that the problem will reach the same critical proportions as is the case in Minamata. The worldwide problem of pollution is now so great, no one can afford to remain indifferent. We can only hope that here and elsewhere, Minamata's message to the world will strike deep into the human heart.